Hello, everyone. We're going to talk about a good starting point for behavior supports, which is the idea of pre-correction and visual reminders. And so we'll get into those now to see how they can be helpful in supporting positive student behavior. So before we get to pre-correction and visual supports, just a couple of ideas around behavior. So behavior has a function to it. There's a meaning, a motivation behind what our students are doing. Understanding that makes us better able to provide meaningful interventions. And then this second one here is one of the more important ones for today. So behavior is predictable, right? We can predict that unwanted behaviors, challenging behaviors that we have seen over the last couple of months are likely to be things that we will continue to see in the future unless we do something to prevent it. And today we're going to talk about pre-correction as kind of the first strategy to prevent it. And then behavior is learned and teachable. And so the other thing we're going to talk about today is creating some visual reminders, visual cues for students to remind them of the behavior that they want to see, because the more we teach that behavior, the more likely it is to change. So what we're going to talk about today are some efficient methods for teaching behavior, pre-correction being the one that we're going to focus on primarily. We'll also talk about how having the rules posted is helpful, and we'll give you an opportunity to create a poster for your environment or routine. We'll talk briefly about acknowledging appropriate behavior and how that can be a way to kind of motivate kids to continue to do something. And then finally, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, but one of the most efficient ways to get students or to teach students behaviors is to model the appropriate behavior. I would often say to teachers, it might be confusing for a student if they're in the hallway and they're being told to keep their voices down because they don't want to disrupt the other classes, but they're being told that by a teacher whose voice is raised at a very high level, right? That might send mixed messages to kids. So if we want them to be quiet in the hallway so others can concentrate, then we're going to lower the volume of our voice when we're giving those instructions in the hallway, modeling what we want students to do. So before we get started with talking about pre-correction, I want you to just take a moment to think of a location or a routine that you currently supervise students where you are encountering unwanted behavior. Things that you don't want to happen are happening. It could be kids yelling, it could be students running, anything along those lines. What are you experiencing? And then think about what would you prefer to see uh, as opposed to those unwanted behaviors. So one of the big ideas around behavior is, rather than telling students to stop doing things, we want to tell them to start doing things. Stop calling out doesn't leave the student with any idea of what I want them to do. Start raising your hand when you want to share an answer helps me kind of get the students moving in the right direction. So you might want to pause here if you're in a group and have a conversation about this. What unwanted behaviors are you currently experiencing during that routine or location, and what would you prefer to see? So you might want to pause now and have that dialogue. And we're going to move on to the next slide. So the first idea here is to create a behavior chart for your location or routine that is of a concern. So there's a couple of examples up here. And on the slide here, we have some guidance. Consider common issues that are contributing to unwanted behaviors and develop anchor charts that take into account those predictable issues and teach alternatives. So for example, this teacher wanted their students to engage in group work, and one of the issues was that they would take a while to get started. And so one of the expectations listed on this chart here is get started right away. Another issue is kids would not work the whole time and they would get up and walk around often while they were expected to do group work. And so work the whole time and stay in your space were examples that were included on this for student expectations. This teacher went a little bit above and beyond and kind of explained why we want this behavior to go be the way it is, and then also put down what the behaviors of the teacher or the adult in that situation would be doing. Either is acceptable. You could have a chart that just has the student behaviors, or you might want to have one that has both students and adults. But we're going to make the suggestion now that you kind of have that conversation that you just had, or that reflection that you just had in mind about what behaviors you're seeing and what behaviors you'd like to see as an alternative. We're going to invite you to pause the video now and create one of these charts for yourself. for your classroom for that routine or location that's causing you an issue. Transitions are not one of the examples up here, but for younger students, transitioning to and from a carpet can be a time-consuming task that should be pre-corrected. For older students, transitioning from class to class is also another issue. So transition might be one that you want to put together. So I'm going to, again, if you'd like to make a chart, maybe pause here, and we're going to move forward in just a second. Okay. So now moving into the pre-correction. So why we want to make use of this behavioral strategy? So first of all, it focuses on predictable unwanted behaviors. Folks who are working with students day in and day out, they have a good idea of what behaviors they're likely to see from students. And so if we can think about those predictable unwanted behaviors and try to put alternatives in place, often that's something that can help students change their behavior. Pre-correction is more effective when the behavior expectations are posted, which is why we just took some time to create a poster. So we're able to point to those expectations and say to the students, this is the expectation around behavior. We want to do this pre-correction repeatedly. We want to review these expectations until we see those unwanted behaviors go away. We shouldn't stop reminding the students of our expectations of what we want to see in those environments until we see them meeting those expectations. And then finally, pre-correction, I'm going to tell the students what I expect of them when they walk into the cafeteria or auditorium. And when I see them meeting those expectations, that can and should be paired with behavior-specific praise. Thank you so much for walking into the cafeteria. It shows me that you're being responsible today. So anytime that we can acknowledge students for doing the behaviors that we've asked them to do, we increase the likelihood that they're going to use that behavior again in the future. And then finally, just a quick script that you might want to use when delivering a pre-correction. So you might say something along the lines of, okay, class, today before we go into the cafeteria, go into the library, I would like to remind you of the expectations for how we eat lunch in this school, or how we get ready to take books out from the library. I'm going to take 2 quick minutes to explain to you what behavior I would like to see during this routine or in this location. Then I'm going to take a few minutes to read that chart with the students. You might want to have the students, you might read it out to them and then say, hey, read this with me, give them an opportunity to get some extra reading practice in, might help them remember it a little bit better. And then, ending that conversation with something along the lines of, over the next few days and weeks, we'll spend a few minutes reviewing these expectations and then letting the kids know that positive recognition is the reward for this. We'll also be looking for classes and students who are following these expectations, and we'll be finding ways to celebrate when they do so. So this is a great place to start in terms of changing and shaping student behavior. Create a chart where you have your expectations in writing, and then use pre-correction as a way to teach those expectations before you have any problems in the first place, or hopefully. So we're going to follow up later with some additional strategies. Hopefully pre-corrections and those visual aids are helpful.